So far we have looked at the first three pasukim, dealing with the relationship between Shevet Levi and the Kahuna. Bamidbar 3:6 set the tone for this relationship, that Vashertu Oto, which Rashi links to the statement in Pasuk Zayin, Vishamru et Mishmarto, that the Bnei Levi were to assist Aharon, referring to the Kohanim, et Mishmarto, with their duties in protecting the Mishkan from any violations from a Zar, a non-Kohen, who wished to usurp the role of the Kahuna. In addition to the role in assisting the Kahuna in guarding the Mishkan, Pasuk Zayin informs us of a second role, that was acting as a Shaliach on behalf of the Bnei Yisrael, on behalf of the nation. This Rashi reads into the words, Vet Mishmeret Kol Ha'edah. In Pasuk Chet, we are told that they also had an added responsibility, that of guarding the Klei HaMishkan, the various utensils, the various articles connected to the Mishkan, and once again, and with a slight change of wording, Vet Mishmeret Bnei Yisrael, they were to function as a Shaliach on behalf of the Bnei Yisrael. Which brings us to Pasuk Tet, bringing us back to the opening statement regarding the relationship between the Bnei Levi and the Kunah, that v'natata et halavim le'aharon ulevanav, nun taf nun, to give or to appoint. In this case, the pshat reading of the phrase would be that you, Moshe, were to present Shevet Levi to Aharon ulevanav, to the Kohanim. The pasuk going on to make a somewhat problematic statement that Netunim Hema Lo Me'et Bnei Yisrael. A surface reading of this phrase presents us with two difficulties. Aside from the wording Netunim, the double verb, we have here some repetitive and somewhat superfluous information, in that the text could have read V'natata et halavim le'aron ulevanav me'et bnei Yisrael. A second problem lies in the actual content, that the Shevet Levi was given as a gift from the Bnei Yisrael, a concept that requires some clarification, in that such a translation would imply that Shevet Levi from the very outset was a separate entity, a separate item belonging to the Bnei Yisrael, and now given as a gift to Aharon and his descendants. In reality, Shevet Levi was one and part of the Bnei Yisrael, not a separate entity to be given away. It is clear that the major translators struggle with this concluding phrase. Most of them resort to some form of poetic language in their translations. From Hirsch we have the following: Netunim, they shall be given. Netumim heima lo me'et bnei Yisrael, indeed they shall be given from the Bnei Yisrael. Kaplan moves away from the literal translation of the words and writes, they are a gift from the Bnei Yisrael, which, leaving aside the actual Hebrew phrasing, would be the point that the pasuk is making. The art scroll, Netunim, given. Netunim hema lo me'et bnei Yisrael, given they are to him from the Bnei Yisrael. And finally we have Rashi's commentary to the second stanza of Bamidbar 3:9. Under the heading of Netunim hema lo, Rashi adds one word, le'ezra, to be of assistance to the Kohanim, which reflects the commentary that Rashi had made to the Vesheretu Oto of Pasuk Vav. And then Rashi goes on to clarify the phrase Me'et Bnei Yisrael, which when read into the Pasuk would suggest that Netunim hema lo, that the Shevet Levi were given to the Kohanim to be of an assistance in their duties from the Bnei Yisrael. To which Rashi comments, Kemo, this would have the same meaning as Mitoch Bnei Yisrael, from amongst the Bnei Yisrael, which both the Mizrahi and the Siftei Chachamim suggest that Rashi is rejecting an alternative translation, an option previously raised, that the Bnei Levi were given as a gift from the Bnei Yisrael, as if to say, up until now, that the Bnei Levi were a separate item, controlled by the Bnei Yisrael, they were now handed over to the Kahuna. Rashi solves this problem by redefining the word Me'et, as they have been selected from the Bnei Yisrael. And this is the point that Rashi goes on to clarify, Klomar, as if to say, Mishar Kol Ha'eda, from amongst the entire congregation, the Bnei Yisrael, Nivdalu Lekach, they, the Bnei Levi, have been separated for this purpose, namely to assist the Kohanim, and this decision comes B'Gzeirat HaMakom, by decree from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'hu natnam lo, emphasis on the v'hu. God is the one that allocated them, the Bnei Levi, to him, Aharon, and his descendants, the Kahuna. And Rashi goes on to support his reading of the text with a quotation from a pasuk in Bamidbar 8:19. Shneimar va'et na'et halaviim netunim li Aharon ulevanav mitoch bnei Yisrael. We hear the pasuk clearly states that it was God that designated, allocated Shevet Levi to assist Aaron ubanav, the Kuhuna, and the pasuk clearly states that this was not from the Bnei Yisrael as a gift, but mitoch Bnei Yisrael. They were selected out from amongst the Bnei Yisrael. The critical phrase in this commentary from Rashi is the statement that Mishar kol ha'eda nivdalu lakach b'gzerat hamakom. The word nivdalu with a bet dalad lamed shoresh points to the process of separating, to setting something apart, to disassociate, to detach. And what Rashi is doing is redefining the word netunim and linking it to the word nivdalu. This change is reflected in the translation of the Gutnik Chumash, as noted many times over. The Gutnik Chumash attempts to provide a translation that is faithful to the interpretation provided by Rashi. The Gutnik Chumash translates the second part of the pasuk as follows: Netumim hema lo, they, the Shevet Levi, are to be separated, me'et b'nei Yisrael, from the b'nei Yisrael, netunim, and totally given over to them, the Kohanim. And in this way, the two difficulties noted earlier are resolved. One, the double netunim, and the me'et b'nei Yisrael. Which brings us to the fifth of the 9 difficulties that the Rebbe raises with respect to Rashi's commentary. In commenting to the statement that Bnei Levi were to safeguard the Mishmeret Bnei Yisrael, Rashi states that Bnei Levi were to act as shluchim, agents, on behalf of the nation as a whole. However, this was to be understood. The question that the Rebbe raises is that given the fact that the Bnei Levi, in addition to their many duties, acted as shluchim to the nation, why did Rashi have to redefine the netunim of Pasuk Tet as nivdalu, that they were separated out of the nation, when he could have taken an explanation that he had already presented, that they were netunim, redesignated as shluchim, me'et b'nei Yisrael, on behalf of the Bnei Yisrael. In other words, the change that Rashi makes in his commentary to Pasuk Tet, on the surface at least, was totally unnecessary.